Welcome to Part 3, Exploring Principles for EAP Materials Development and Design. I'm Scott Douglas, and I'm an Associate Professor in the University of British Columbia's Faculty of Education on the Okanagan campus. I'm also the Series Director of Academic Inquiry, published by Oxford University Press, Canada. Today, we're going to look at a few principles for writing EAP materials. So far, we've discovered 6, and I thought I'd like to introduce you to 3 more. So this is our big question then. What are some key principles for EAP materials development? Today we're going to look at lexical focus, focus on form, and focus on meaning. And we're going to see how that might relate to you creating your own EAP materials or choosing materials that are appropriate for your learners. We've talked a little bit about how principles are important for informing EAP materials development, as well as moving your practice away from practice towards praxis, where now the materials you use are grounded in the literature and in research. So I've been tweeting a lot about this lately, and I have about 27 tweets out there. I thought we would look at 3 of 18 of them today. So the first one we're going to look at is this idea of having a lexical focus. So when I'm creating EAP materials, I'm thinking about a number of things. I might be thinking of what kinds of grammar will help the students, what kinds of listening skills, etc., etc. Well, I'm also going to focus on vocabulary as well. And so how am I going to do that? Well, for me, a principal approach to vocabulary instruction develops the student's breadth of knowledge, so that's how many words do they know, as well as their depth of knowledge, how well they are using those words. And I like to focus on frequency as a guideline for choosing which words are the ones that we should focus on in class. I think by focusing on words that have a higher frequency or that occur more often in the language, we get a bigger bang for our buck in terms of how much time and effort we're investing in learning this vocabulary. So for example, when you're creating a unit of instruction, you're going to be thinking about, okay, well, what vocabulary am I going to be teaching? And you can use tools such as those found on www.lextutor.ca to work out which of these words are higher frequency and which are lower frequency. That's going to help you get for your breadth of vocabulary. But you're also going to want to think, well, what vocabulary skills do I want to focus on in a unit of instruction to help develop the student's depth of knowledge? So here we have an example where we're looking at the skill of ensuring variation, or helping students vary their vocabulary and use synonyms, which is a depth of knowledge skill. And thinking about, and also warning them a little bit that not all synonyms are the same. So the example on this page here is Victoria is a famous Canadian city. So maybe students have used the word famous quite a lot in their essay so far, and so they look up a synonym and they find this, oh, here's a good one. Victoria is a notorious Canadian city. Well, they both kind of mean well-known, but they're not exactly the same thing. And so it's trying to help students develop that depth of knowledge that's going to facilitate their writing. The next principle I thought we could talk about is this idea of focus on form, and thinking about what activities are you going to do during a lesson or during a unit of inquiry that are going to increase learners' awareness of the language and prime them for future use and encounters with similar language. So for me, focus on form is about preparing students for comprehensible input later on. I think that students don't learn something in the input unless they notice it. And so Schmidt talks about this concept of noticing, and now noticing is a key aspect that triggers language acquisition. So students are getting this vast flood of input from our materials, but what inside of those materials can we highlight to draw their attention to it so that they can now begin the process of acquiring that vocabulary or grammar structure or whatever it might be. So here in this case, we're talking about subject, adjective, clauses, and phrases, and we're looking at examples of subject, adjective, clauses, and phrases. But what's the goal of this? Well, one of the goals is so when they encounter subject, adjective, clauses, and phrases in their textbooks or in writing models, they'll notice them and begin to acquire that kind of language. Finally, the one that we want to look at today, I thought, is this idea of focus on meaning. So not only do we want to look at like what structures do we want to highlight in the input for students, but also we want activities that are going to provide students with the opportunity for purposeful interaction. So what do I mean by purposeful interaction? Well, Long, he had the interaction hypothesis, and he said that how are languages learned? Well, additional languages are learned when people have willing interlocutors with whom to negotiate meaning. That is, we're setting up situations in our classroom for students to talk together on a common task, and they want to understand each other. And so this willingness to work together is a key aspect of that. Also, we talked earlier about comprehensible input, but that's really only part of the equation. Swain talked to us about comprehensible output, and getting students using the language is going to help trigger this language acquisition. And finally, another idea that's sort of relevant here is Vygotsky's idea of the zone of proximal development, or the ZPD. This is, so how do students learn? Well, learning takes place in that space between what they can do on their own and what they can do in collaboration with their more capable peers, or with their peers. And so it's by working together we're able to do more than we could by working on our own. And so this is part of this principle of focus on meaning. So we're going to be constantly thinking about, okay, well, how can we embed interaction into the materials? So here we have an example of a Venn diagram, and it's just an example of an activity where students are working together to create a Venn diagram, comparing and contrasting two different areas. Of course, this is grounded in the unit of inquiry, which is looking at Canadian geographical regions. So we're learning content, but we're also working together. And I think that working together is one of the engines of language acquisition, even in an EAP classroom. So there you go. That's the three things we're going to focus on for this video: lexical focus, focus on form, and focus on meaning. If you're curious about the other 18 principles that I've been talking about in these videos, please check out my other videos. You can also check out #EAP materials writing. That's with a space between EAP and materials and a space between materials and writing. And if you look on Twitter, you'll see all 27 of the ideas that helped inform this short video. So thank you very much. I appreciate you watching. And here we have some of the references that go along with some of the ideas that we talked about in today's video.